Get ready to go back in time as we explore the bizarre world of ancient sports and games. From gladiatorial combats to a game of keep-ups with a fire torch. Here are 20 of the most unusual ancient sports and games you won't believe actually existed. The first game on our list is the Mesoamerican ball game, also known as Elroul. This game was played by the ancient Mesoamerican civilizations, such as the Aztecs, and it involved two teams trying to maneuver a small, hard rubber ball through a stone hoop located high up on a wall. The ball was incredibly heavy, weighing around 4 to 9 kilos. The game was not just a test of skill, but also endurance and strength. Players would use their hips, elbows, and knees to move the ball, and the intensity and complexity of the game lead some scholars to believe that it was more than just a sport. It had religious overtones and the stakes were high. If the losing team failed to meet the expected score, the game could end in human sacrifice. Next, we travel to ancient Rome, where men fought to the death in the famous gladiator fights. These brutal contests were a form of blood sport that took place in the Roman Colosseums and other public arenas. Gladiators from all walks of life, including slaves, prisoners, and even volunteers, would fight each other using a variety of weapons such as swords, nets, and tridents. The crowds would cheer and bet on their favorite gladiators, and the victors would be awarded with adulation and often a golden crown. While these fights may seem barbaric by today's standards, they were an integral part of Roman culture and history. Our third stop takes us to ancient Greece, where the ancient Greeks practiced a martial art known as pastimes. This full-contact combat sport was a combination of wrestling and boxing, and it was considered the ultimate test of a warrior's skills. Unlike modern martial arts, there were no rules or weight classes in pankration, and fighters were allowed to use any means necessary to defeat their opponent, including biting, gouging out eyes, and choking. The sport was so intense that it earned the nickname the cruelest sport under the sun. Despite its brutality, pankration was highly respected in ancient Greece, and the winners were celebrated as true warriors. In fact, the ancient Olympic Games included a pankration event, and many believe that pankration was the inspiration for modern mixed martial arts, or MMA. Back in Rome, the Emperor Nero built an artificial lake and flooded the entire area of the Great Colosseum to stage mock naval battles known as These battles were fought between two opposing teams of oarsmen, maneuvered their ships in an attempt to outmaneuver and destroy the other team. Just like real battles, the Naumachia were filled with action and drama. Soldiers would engage in fierce hand-to-hand combat on the ships, and the crowds would watch with anticipation as the battle raged on. The Naumachia were a popular form of entertainment for the Romans, and they were seen as a way to honor the Roman Navy's victories at sea. Our next stop takes us to Central Asia, where a game called buzkashi is still played today, but it was also played in ancient times. Buzkashi is often described as a game like polo played on horseback, but instead of a ball, a goat carcass is used. The objective of the game is to carry the goat carcass into the opponent's goal, and the sport requires a great deal of skill, strength, and agility. Players use their bodies to block opponents and keep possession of the goat. While trying to navigate the rough terrain, the game can be violent and dangerous, but it is also highly entertaining. It's a cultural icon in Central Asia, and it's a testament to the region's love for horses and athletic competition. We now travel to the Viking lands, where the warriors engaged in a violent stickball-like game known as Nat. The objective of the game was to score by hitting a ball into the opponent's goal using a long wooden stick. But unlike modern field hockey or lacrosse, Natliker was a full-contact sport with few rules and no restrictions on how hard players could hit each other. In fact, the game was so violent that it often left players injured or even dead. Despite the danger, Natliker was a beloved pastime for the Vikings, and it was an important part of their culture. The game was played during festivals and special occasions, and it was a way for the Vikings to let off some steam after a hard day of pillaging or trading. Our next stop takes us to ancient India, where the ancient Indians played a unique game called kabaddi. The objective of the game was to tag opposing players while holding your breath and reciting a sacred chant. Players would then try to tackle the tagged player and bring them back to their base without letting them touch the ground. The game required a great deal of stamina, strength, and mental focus, and it was an important part of Indian culture. The game was played during festivals and special occasions, and it was a way for the Indians to celebrate their strength and athleticism. From India, we move to ancient Egypt, where the ancient Egyptians played a game called tug of war. The Egyptians called this game the contest of strength between Upper and Lower Egypt, and it was considered a spiritual and physical contest. Two teams would pull on opposite ends of a rope in an attempt to drag the other team across a line. The game was played during the annual flooding of the Nile River, and it was seen as a way to appease the gods and ensure a bountiful harvest. The game was highly competitive and intense, and it was played by both men and women of all social classes. While we're still in ancient Mesopotamia, let's take a look at the royal game of yore. This strategy board game was played around 2600 BC and was named after the royal city of Ur. The game was played with pieces on a board with the objective being to move your pieces around the board and capture your opponent's pieces. The game required skill, strategy, and a bit of luck. and it was enjoyed by the elite members of society. The Royal Game of Year is considered to be one of the oldest board games ever played, and it's still popular today among board game enthusiasts. Still, in ancient Egypt, another popular game was senet. This board game was believed to have been played as early as 3500 BC, and was considered an important part of Egyptian culture. The game was played with pieces on a board with spaces that had various symbols and hieroglyphs. The objective of the game was to navigate your pieces along the board and avoid landing on spaces that had negative symbols, as these could send your piece back to the start. It was believed that the game of senet represented the journey of the soul through the afterlife, and that playing the game could help the living connect with the dead. The game is still played today and has inspired modern board games and card games. Let's now travel to medieval England, where men would participate in a sport known as shin kicking. As the name suggests, the sport involved two players facing off and trying to kick each other in the shins as hard as possible. The sport was a test of endurance and pain tolerance, and it often left players with black eyes, broken bones, and severe bruising. While it may seem barbaric by today's standards, shin kicking was a popular form of entertainment in medieval England, and it was considered a way to test one's bravery and strength. Another strange sport that was played in medieval Europe was greased pole climbing. This bizarre competition involved contestants attempting to climb a tall pole that had been coated in animal fat or grease. The goal was to reach the top of the pole and retrieve a prize, usually a bag of money or a woman's underwear. The slippery surface of the pole made it extremely difficult to climb, and the contestants would often fall and injure themselves. Despite the danger, greased pole climbing was a popular attraction at fairs and festivals, and it was seen as a test of strength, agility, and determination. Our next stop takes us back to Mexico, where the ancient Mesoamericans played a sport known as pelota mexicana. This game was similar to modern squash or racquetball, but it was played with a heavy rubber ball that weighed up to 9 kilos. Players used leather gloves to hit the ball against a wall, and the game required a great deal of skill and athleticism. The game was not only a test of physical ability, but also mental acuity, as players had to strategize and plan their moves carefully. The stakes were high, and the game was often played to settle disputes or as a religious ritual. In ancient China, a game called jianzi was played. This game involved keeping a weighted shuttlecock airborne using only feet. Players would use their feet to kick, control and direct the shuttlecock, and the game required a great deal of skill, balance, and coordination. The game is still played today, particularly in southern China, and it's considered a traditional sport. Let's now return to medieval England, where a sport known as mob football was played. This game was a chaotic and violent contest between two teams of townspeople, and the objective was to carry a ball into the other team's goal. There were no rules or regulations, and the game could last for hours or even days. Players used any means necessary to advance the ball, and violence and injuries were commonplace. The game was eventually banned by King Edward II in 1314 due to its violent and unruly nature. We now traveled to Norse lands, where the warriors engaged in a type of wrestling known as glima. This full-contact grappling sport involved two opponents trying to gain dominance over the other by taking them down and pinning them to the ground. Unlike modern wrestling, glimp was a more brutal and Viking-style form of grappling that required a great deal of strength, skill, and strategy. The sport was an important part of Norse culture, and it was often featured at festivals and special events. In ancient Scandinavia, a unique sport known as ski archery was practiced. This combination of skiing and shooting involved athletes skiing through a course while shooting at targets. The sport required a great deal of skill and precision, and it was often done in harsh weather conditions. Ski archery was an important part of the culture in Scandinavia, and it was a way for the people to practice their hunting and skiing skills. The sport is still practiced today in some parts of Scandinavia, and it's a popular winter activity. Our penultimate game is chariot racing. This high-speed, high-risk spectacle was a popular form of entertainment in ancient Rome and Greece. Chariot races were held in large arenas such as the Circus Maximus in Rome and the Olympic Stadium in Greece. The races were a major event and attracted large crowds who would bet on their favorite teams. Charioteers and horses would race around the track at breakneck speeds, and the racers were often fraught with danger as chariots would collide and horses would stumble. Despite the risks, chariot racing was a popular sport, and the top drivers were treated like celebrities. In the Byzantine Empire, knights would compete in a bizarre form of jousting known as fire jousting. During this competition, knights would charge towards each other on horseback while carrying burning torches. The object was to knock the torch out of their opponent's hand, and the first knight to do so was declared the winner. Fire jousting was a popular spectacle during the Byzantine Empire and was seen as a test of courage, skill, and horsemanship. Finally, we come to the Celtic traditions of hammer throwing. This unique sport involved throwing a heavy stone hammer as far as possible. The hammer consisted of a heavy head attached to a wooden handle, and the sport required a great deal of strength and technique. While the sport is no longer widely practiced, It is believed to be the origin of the modern Olympic sport of hammer throw. The ancient Celts saw the hammer throw as a ceremonial and religious practice rather than a sport, and it was often performed during festivals and rituals. Well, that is all for now. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with fellow fans. Your support helps us bring you more captivating content like this.